Hello again. Starting a bit of a new project this time, with kind of a cyberpunk city, based on the new 5 parsecs rules that have come out. So I'm creating more of a concept type building this time, trying a bunch of techniques, seeing which work, which don't, and hopefully coming out with something usable at the end. To begin with, using foam core to create the ground floor, then also adding a bit of brickwork underneath the plaster by using a knife, pulling back some of the paper, and carving in using a tool, just a simple brickwork pattern. I wanted to experiment a bit with the different wall types, so having a combination of concrete walls, kind of more foundational plaster, and a few bits of brickwork showing through, so you'd get various states of dilapidation, and where it had been patched up and fixed over the years. To create some fabricated concrete sections, I took some underfloor insulation board, trimmed it down to size, made sure the texture was going the right way, then attached it using hot glue. I also made some fancier panels by just carving away with a knife and getting a nice 45-degree angle, which gives everything a kind of sci-fi look. I mostly used this to line the edges of the foam core so it would cover the seam and give me something to work with later. I'm not going to go too in depth on the interior for this piece, but I carved 2 doorways out so I could have a playable interior and a window or 2. Taking some regular styrofoam, I cut it down to size so it's the same height as the walls, then glued it around the interior to provide a bit more structure and a little bit of interior decorating as well. On the exterior, I wanted a few sections where the rebar was visible through the concrete and the concrete pillar had collapsed, so I trimmed down some cocktail sticks and part of a bamboo skewer, ripped a pillar in half, then stuck it back together using the cocktail sticks and the skewer, so they'd be visible. Also pulling a few trunks away to add to the dilapidated effect. I worked around the piece, building up the walls using styrofoam and more of the insulation board. To cover up the edges of the foam core, I took some EVA foam, trimmed it down into strips, then glued it over the edges using matte Mod Podge. I also added a few sections where they were more squared, with again some 45-degree angles cut off the edges, so you'd have some plates reinforcing the structure. Next up, to add some external pipes and wires, I took some of this hobby wire I got from the local store, always seems to come out at Christmas, then taking a pair of clippers to bend it to a 90-degree angle, then using some more matte Mod Podge to secure it to the wall. To add some straight pipes, I just used some bamboo skewers again, trimmed them down, then using more matte Mod Podge to secure them to the walls. With most of the base form for the ground floor done, I put that to one side and started working on the upper floor. So using foam core to get a rough shape, then a piece of underfloor insulation to add a roof. And this wouldn't have a playable interior, and would be almost more kind of window dressing and provide an area on top that would be usable. So continuing the steps I took on the ground floor, by taking more styrofoam and insulation board to create various cladding and sections where different materials had been used. To fill some of the gaps between various sheets and textures, I took some general purpose polyfiller and started blending the seams together. Then once that had had time to dry, I went in with a black gesso and gave a prime coat to the entire piece. I followed this up with a layer of brown mixed with grey to create a kind of dingy concrete colour, applying that onto most of the external parts. To build up some texture, I took a fairly rounded brush and stippled the paint on so you get some texture building up, as well as removing some of the obvious brush strokes. I followed this with a layer of pale sand and a fairly heavy coat, which should be followed by a black wash afterwards to get some of the detail back in the recesses. But I mainly wanted to differentiate between the plaster and the stone base sections. As this was a concept build, I didn't really have anything to base the paint scheme off of, so I went for a kind of industrial colour scheme, but then brightened it up a bit, so it wouldn't be as oppressive to look at. Returning to the stippling, I went in with a white paint and went over the plaster sections again, so you'd get more of a texture build up and it would brighten the colour up again. For the exposed pipes, as well as the EVA foam sections, I went in with a metallic paint and gave a quick coat of that. With the kind of baseline level of paint done, I went in and added some graffiti. So I did a few styles, mixture of felt tip pens and freehand doodles, as well as a few sections where I blocked out a white paint in a weird shape, then went in and added some detailing with black felt tips and coloured ones later. It's also a good opportunity to sneak some Easter eggs in and a little bit of world building, if you're so inclined. By adding random sections of colour on top of a white background, you can add some black detailing layers in later, which makes it look like you've tried to write something, when in reality it's just gibberish. You can also add a few streaks down where the paints run from the original design. I felt it needed a bit of bright colour at this point, so taking a seafoam green, that lovely kind of 60s, 70s bathroom colour, I went in and went over the EVA foam. Then followed this up with a light black wash over the entire thing. I also wanted to experiment with trying to make some neon signs, so taking more of the hobby wire and the clippers to rotate it into various letters and shapes. I built a quick backboard out of plasticard. I then gave the letters a base coat of white. This is definitely something that needs to be refined later, but there's definitely something there. I just need to figure out how exactly to get it all to work together nicely. On the exposed seams at the base of the build, added a bit more EVA foam, then gave it a nice coat of that seafoam green. For the seams on the upper floor, I took some more EVA foam and curved it round the edges, taking various different panels, so it would look a bit like a hastily done bit of edge cladding as well, which also helps to round out the piece, which helps to make it appear a bit less blocky. Jumping back to the neon signs where the white paint was dried, and I probably should have done a layer of primer underneath, as I did have a few issues with the paint kind of wiping off, but giving them a very bright layer of coloured paint, then dry fitted them to figure out the placement for all the signs. Then using matte Mod Podge to glue the backboard into place. To get a simulated lighting for the signs, I went in with a dry brush and applied the same colour as the signs on the background. This doesn't look ideal, it looks okay, but it would be a lot easier to do with an airbrush, so that's something I might look into the future. But again, it's a concept piece, not everything's going to work. It's more about chucking everything at the wall and seeing what does work. I had some adhesive bedazzle beads that came in a square shape, so before I took them off I gave them a prime of black gesso, and painted a few of them in various colours, so I had a few in the seafoam green and a few in the metallic as well. But I painted a few in the kind of neon blue, so I could put them on the interior and use them as very basic lighting decorations. The interior is going to be very bare for this piece. It's something I might go back and do later, and I wanted the interior to be playable, not necessarily the point of the build. To create some push-fit doors, I used some EVA foam and some foam core as the backing, so they would fit within the door frames without any need for any kind of mechanism, which would allow me to block off the building or potentially use the doors as a moving feature. For the window, I used some plastic packaging, trimmed it down into a square, and then pushed it down through between the two pieces of EVA foam, which is ideal for this stuff because it does kind of give, and you can push shapes and indentations into it, so without needing to glue, it will hold the glass in place. With the doors fitted and the window in place, it was pretty much done. So I learned a few useful things about making kind of a post-modern cyberpunk type building. Definitely a few techniques and things I'll take forward into other builds, and it'll be perfectly usable in a kind of sci-fi setting. So yeah, fairly pleased with how it came out. I think the graffiti in the concrete sections and the EVA foam cladding are definitely worth taking forward, and the external wires all look quite nice. The neon signs definitely need work, and the interior needs a lot of work. But yeah, on the whole, pretty glad with how it turned out. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time.